You won't believe what happened when one determined farmer stood up to the HOA, Karen, who tried to take everything from them. But before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you amazing stories like this one. Alex had always found solace in the quiet rhythms of farm life. The soft rustle of the wind through the trees, the distant cluck of chickens, and the occasional whinny of a horse were all part of the peaceful symphony that defined their little corner of the world. The farm, which had been in Alex's family for generations, was located at the edge of a suburban neighborhood. It wasn't an overly large plot, but it was enough to sustain Alex's small business of organic produce, livestock, and artisanal products. The farm had a rustic charm, with an old barn that had weathered countless storms and fields that stretched out like a patchwork quilt, filled with crops, herbs, and wildflowers. This land had always been a sanctuary, a place where Alex could escape the pressures of the modern world. Farming wasn't just a job, it was a passion. Alex was dedicated to growing everything from heirloom tomatoes to fragrant lavender, always striving to maintain an organic approach. Over the years, they had worked tirelessly to ensure the farm thrived. It was a lifestyle that demanded hard work and commitment, but Alex loved every minute of it. Each season brought something new. Spring's promise of fresh vegetables, summer's bounty of berries, and autumn's harvest of pumpkins and squash. The sense of satisfaction that came from seeing the fruits of their labor was indescribable. Yet, despite the tranquility that surrounded the farm, there was an underlying tension that Alex could never quite escape. It was the HOA, the Homeowners Association, that governed the suburban neighborhood nearby. Though their rules were primarily focused on maintaining aesthetic uniformity in the residential area, it didn't take long for Alex to realize that the HOA had an obsessive need to control every aspect of the neighborhood, even things that didn't concern them. The HOA was headed by Karen, a woman with an iron grip on power and a clear belief that her vision of suburban life was the only acceptable one. She had a reputation for being relentless in her pursuit of enforcing HOA rules, and she had turned her attention to Alex's farm. It wasn't enough for her to focus on the cookie-cutter houses with their perfectly trimmed lawns and neat flower beds. No, Karen had decided that Alex's farm, with its rustic charm and slightly unconventional beauty, didn't fit the mold. The HOA had already fined Alex multiple times for things that seemed completely arbitrary, like the fact that the barn's paint had faded over time or that some of the farm's fencing wasn't perfectly aligned. Karen's obsession with conformity had become an ongoing headache for Alex, but they had always managed to resist her interference. Every time Karen tried to impose her rules on the farm, Alex stood firm. After all, it was their property, not hers. But Karen wasn't someone who accepted rejection easily. She was used to getting what she wanted, and she was determined to bend Alex to her will. One afternoon, Alex was repairing a fence near the edge of the property. The wooden post had started to rot over the years, and some of the boards had come loose. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was necessary to maintain the integrity of the farm. As Alex worked, they heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up the gravel driveway. Glancing up, they saw a black SUV with tinted windows and a license plate that was far too fancy for the quiet neighborhood. Alex immediately recognized the vehicle. It belonged to Karen. The moment Karen stepped out of the car, Alex braced themselves for what was about to unfold. She was wearing a crisp, white blouse and a pair of sharply pressed slacks, her face wearing a mask of authority that she carried around like a weapon. She approached Alex with her usual sense of entitlement, practically marching toward the farm with an air of superiority. "Alex," she began in her most condescending tone, "I've come to inspect your property to make sure it's up to HOA standards." There was again the belief that she had the right to dictate what Alex could and couldn't do on their own land. Alex stood up from their crouched position, wiping their hands on their jeans, trying to remain composed. "This is private property, Karen. You can't just come onto my farm without permission." Karen didn't even flinch. "Oh, I'm afraid I can," she said, her voice dripping with a mixture of disdain and fake sweetness. "The HOA has jurisdiction over every property in this neighborhood, including yours. And your farm? Well, it doesn't quite meet the aesthetic standards we've established." Alex took a deep breath, trying to maintain their patience. I don't care about your standards, Karen. This is a working farm, and I'm not interested in making it look like a suburban housing development. The land has been in my family for generations. You don't have any right to tell me how to run it. Karen crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. You're making a mistake by resisting. I'm here to ensure that your farm doesn't bring down the property values of the other homes in the neighborhood. If you think I'm going to let you just do whatever you want here, you're mistaken. Alex's blood began to boil, but they kept their voice steady. You don't get to decide what happens on my land. I'm not violating any laws, and I'm certainly not violating any HOA rules. You can't just come onto my property because you think it's not up to code. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as her frustration began to show. Well, if you're going to be so difficult, then I'll just have to report this to the board. They'll see things my way. And trust me, you'll regret not cooperating. She took a step closer, eyeing the farm's layout. You've got that old barn falling apart, and the fence is crooked. You're really letting things slide, aren't you? Alex stepped forward, blocking her view. Stay off my property, Karen. I'm not going to let you inspect anything. Their tone was firm, resolute. Karen scoffed, eyes flashing with anger. This isn't over, Alex. You think you've won, but I'm just getting started. She spun around, practically storming off the property with a look of utter fury on her face. As Alex watched her leave, they couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had stood their ground, but they knew this confrontation was only the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to back down easily, and now that she'd been rejected, Alex knew she would do everything in her power to try to get back at them. The fight for the farm's autonomy had just begun, and Alex was ready for whatever Karen might throw their way. The peaceful farm, once a sanctuary from the world's problems, was now the battleground for a much larger conflict, one that would test Alex's resolve and their ability to protect the land they loved. After the confrontation, Alex thought that maybe Karen would back off, especially since she had no real grounds to impose her authority over the farm. However, it quickly became clear that Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. In the following days, strange things started to happen on the farm. Alex noticed that there were more cars driving past the property, often slowing down as they glanced at the land, as if someone was inspecting it. The neighbors had always been friendly, so it felt out of place. It didn't take long before Alex received a certified letter in the mail, something that would change everything. The letter was from the HOA, signed by Karen herself, demanding that Alex make several changes to the farm. According to the letter, Alex was in violation of multiple HOA rules. The barn's appearance was too rustic, the fences were misaligned, and there were unapproved structures on the property. It was clear that Karen had escalated things in a big way, using her position to target Alex's livelihood. The letter threatened severe consequences if the requested changes weren't made immediately, including fines, legal action, and the possibility of a lawsuit. Alex felt a knot tighten in their stomach as they read the letter. They had expected Karen to retaliate, but they hadn't anticipated her going this far. It wasn't just about the aesthetics of the farm anymore. It was about control. Karen was trying to undermine everything Alex had worked for, and she was willing to use every tool at her disposal to do it. The next day, Karen showed up at the farm again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had brought along a lawyer, a slick-looking man with a suit that seemed out of place in the dusty farmyard. Karen smiled smugly as she walked up to Alex, who was standing by the barn, hands on hips, trying to figure out their next move. "Alex," Karen said, her tone dripping with false politeness, "I hope you've had time to consider the letter I sent. I've brought along Mr. Harrison here, a legal professional who will be handling this case for the HOA. He's going to explain how serious this situation is." She gestured toward the lawyer, who gave Alex a curt nod. Alex felt a surge of anger, but held it in check, unwilling to let Karen get the satisfaction of seeing them flustered. "I'm not interested in your lawyer, Karen. I've already told you that this is my property, and I don't need you or anyone else telling me what to do with it." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, speaking in a calm, calculated tone. "I understand your position, Alex, but the HOA's authority is not something you can ignore. You've received multiple warnings about your property's noncompliance with the community guidelines, and now it's time to take legal action if necessary. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to ensure that the HOA's rules are followed, and that includes your farm." Alex's mind raced. They had no interest in getting into a legal battle with Karen and the HOA, but it was clear now that Karen wasn't going to stop until she forced them into compliance. She had the power and resources of the HOA behind her, and it seemed that nothing was off the table for her in this pursuit. Alex could feel the pressure mounting, but they weren't going to give in. "You can't just come onto my land and bully me into doing what you want," Alex snapped. "This farm has been in my family for generations. If you want to take me to court, fine, but I'm not changing anything just because you don't like the way it looks." Karen's face tightened with fury, her lips curling into a sneer. "This is your last chance, Alex. You can either comply now and make the changes we've requested, or we'll take it to the next level. You'll be facing thousands of dollars in fines, and who knows what else might come from a lawsuit. I can assure you that the HOA has deep pockets, and we will fight you every step of the way." Alex could feel their heart pounding in their chest, but they stood tall, refusing to back down. "You're not getting away with this, Karen. I don't care how deep the HOA's pockets are. I'll fight you in court if that's what it takes. I'm not going to let you take my farm from me." Karen's expression faltered for a moment, her confidence wavering just slightly before she regained her composure. She turned to Mr. Harrison, who nodded as if he were anticipating this response. "Fine," Karen said with a cold smile. "But don't say I didn't warn you. You'll regret this, Alex. Mark my words." With that, she turned on her heel and walked back toward her car, her lawyer trailing behind her. The tension hung in the air as Alex watched them leave. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had stopped, and all Alex could hear was the sound of their own heartbeat. They knew that Karen would not let this go, but they also knew that they couldn't let her bully them into submission. This farm was their livelihood, their home, and they would fight to protect it no matter what. After Karen's visit, Alex spent the next few days researching their rights and consulting with a lawyer to understand what options they had. The legal process would be long and drawn out, but they were ready to stand their ground. It was a battle that was far from over, and though Alex was worried about the potential consequences, they were determined not to lose their farm. The HOA had underestimated the power of a determined individual who wasn't willing to give up without a fight. Alex had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and loved the land too deeply to let Karen and her HOA take it from them. They knew this fight would be tough, but they were ready to take it to court if necessary. The days following Karen's legal threat were tense, but Alex wasn't about to let her intimidate them. They spent countless hours reading through laws and regulations, learning everything they could about property rights and HOA authority. Armed with this knowledge, Alex started to prepare for the battle they knew was coming. The atmosphere on the farm became charged with a sense of resolve. Alex wasn't just fighting for the land, but for the way of life they had worked so hard to preserve. The legal paperwork arrived soon after, formalizing the HOA's complaints. It was a long list of issues that seemed petty in nature, but were intended to break Alex's spirit. Karen's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had prepared a thick stack of documents, claiming that the farm was in violation of several community guidelines, and these violations were enough to justify hefty fines and potential foreclosure of the property. The list included everything from the slightly uneven fence posts to the type of flowers in the garden. Each issue seemed more ridiculous than the last, but Karen was determined to tear down the peaceful farm that had existed for so long outside the constraints of suburban conformity. The first court date arrived, and Alex walked into the courtroom with a sense of quiet determination. The sight of Karen sitting across from them, dressed in her usual crisp suit, made Alex's resolve even stronger. Karen looked smug, clearly believing she would win. But Alex had learned that this fight wasn't just about the farm. It was about standing up for what was right. As the case unfolded, it became clear that the HOA's case against Alex was flimsy at best. The arguments put forward by Karen and Mr. Harrison seemed increasingly desperate, almost laughable at times. There was no substantial legal ground for their complaints. They were simply trying to bully Alex into submission. Despite the clear lack of merit in the HOA's case, Karen refused to back down. She and her lawyer dug in their heels, attempting to twist every small detail to make it seem like Alex was the one in the wrong. They pointed out the smallest of issues: the leaning barn, the untidy flower beds, and even the way the cows seemed to wander a little too freely. It was as if they were searching for anything they could use to weaken Alex's defense. But Alex, with their lawyer by their side, remained calm and unwavering. During the trial, Alex's lawyer presented a solid argument. They pointed out that the HOA had no right to enforce its aesthetic rules on Alex's private farm, especially since the farm was in no way affecting the surrounding homes or the neighborhood as a whole. Alex's lawyer explained that the HOA's reach didn't extend beyond the residential area and that no law was being broken by the farm's operations. They also emphasized that Alex's property had been maintained within the bounds of good stewardship, and any minor issues could be easily fixed without being subject to the excessive demands of the HOA. The turning point came when Alex's lawyer called upon a local expert in land rights and property law to testify. The expert explained that the HOA's rules were not enforceable when it came to private properties like Alex's farm, which was zoned differently than the rest of the neighborhood. This testimony was a game changer. It showed that Karen and the HOA had overstepped their authority by attempting to regulate Alex's property in such an intrusive manner. It also cast doubt on the legitimacy of the HOA's complaints, highlighting their attempt to impose unreasonable standards that went far beyond their jurisdiction. At one point during the trial, Karen's true nature came to light. As Alex's lawyer presented evidence that refuted the HOA's claims, Karen became visibly flustered. She interrupted multiple times, trying to regain control of the narrative, but her frustration was evident. The judge, a seasoned professional who had likely seen countless HOA cases, was growing increasingly exasperated with Karen's attempts to sidestep the law. "Ms. Karen," the judge said sternly, "if you can't provide evidence that these issues are significant enough to warrant legal action, we'll need to adjourn this case. We cannot waste time on frivolous claims." Karen, her face reddening with frustration, stood up abruptly, demanding that the court rule in her favor. "Your Honor," she insisted, "this is about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood. This is about ensuring that all properties comply with the HOA's vision for a perfect community. If we allow this farm to continue unchecked, it will set a dangerous precedent for others in the neighborhood." Her voice was shaking with barely controlled anger. "We can't let this sort of anarchy go on." Alex's lawyer responded with a calm, yet cutting remark. "Ms. Karen, what you're calling anarchy is a lawful, privately owned farm that has been operating for years. It's not a matter of vision. It's a matter of respect for property rights. Your actions are not only legally baseless, but also an overreach of power. If you want to live in a community where conformity is paramount, then perhaps the farm is not the problem. It's the HOA's desire to control others that is." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the words hanging in the air. Karen's face twisted with rage, but there was nothing more she could do. The facts were clear, and the law was on Alex's side. The judge ruled in Alex's favor, dismissing the HOA's claims and ordering that any fines be immediately revoked. In the end, the court didn't just rule against Karen. It sent a clear message about the limits of HOA authority and the importance of respecting individual property rights. After the trial, Alex walked out of the courtroom with a sense of victory and relief. It had been a long, stressful process, but they had won. The farm was safe, and Karen's attempt to take it down had failed. But there was more to it than just the legal victory. It was about sending a message to Karen and the HOA that no one had the right to bully people into submission. As Alex left the courthouse, they couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. The battle had been tough, and the emotional toll had been high, but in the end, the farm had won, and that was what mattered. Alex had stood firm against a powerful adversary, and in doing so, had preserved the peaceful life they had worked so hard to create. For Karen, the defeat was a hard pill to swallow. She had spent months scheming and pushing for a result that never materialized. Her power had been challenged, and for the first time, she had learned that she couldn't control everything. The HOA, once a seemingly untouchable force, had been thwarted by the simple yet powerful idea that personal rights and autonomy matter more than the desire for conformity. As Alex drove back to the farm that afternoon, they felt a deep sense of gratitude for the land, the people who had supported them, and the hard-won victory. The farm was theirs to keep, and the next chapter of their life was ready to begin.